Hey everyone, welcome back to Creative Ops, the show where we decode how tech actually works behind the scenes. As always, I'm your host Tucker, and I am again joined by our resident expert Munir.
Hey Tucker, it's really good to be back.
Thanks for joining us again. So today we're talking about something that every business needs, but few understand well: web security.
Yeah, it's one of those things that only becomes important and priority after it goes wrong. Security, it's not just an IT concern. That's what you need to understand. It's a business critical issue, whether you're a founder, you're a marketer, or simply running an e-commerce website. Your reputation, your customer trust, and even your bottom line depends on staying secure.
In my mind, it just goes to lawsuit avoidance. So that's super important. But when we talk about security in web context, what exactly are we covering?
So we're talking about several layers of defense. So defending everything from how you write your code from the bottom level of it to how you store your data and even how your users access your platform. So it covers authentication, encryption, secure data storage, preventing malicious code executions, and more.
Yeah, there's a lot there, but obviously, front and back end differ in regards to security. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. From a front-end point of view, security focuses more on the browser and user interactions. That you can think of, for example, form validations. If you have a contact form, you need to validate the inputs in that form. You need to protect your cookies from being copied and then reused to do malicious activities on your website. You need to, for example, avoid exposing your API keys if you're using API keys. From a backend point of view, security is about what happens behind the scene. So it's about protecting your servers, your database, your authentication logic, for example, your business rules. And here's a good metaphor that we use when it comes to describing security for our clients. You think of front-end security as locking your doors and windows, and your backend security is making sure that no one can get into the foundations of your house, like the basement, or even control your power supply.
I think that's a really good metaphor. It really helps me visualize kind of what you're saying. But what are the most common security flaws that you're seeing in websites today?
Well, there are a lot of stuff that we're seeing nowadays, but I think the most spread security flaws that we're seeing nowadays are first, weak authentication. Like you would see people until we're in 2025 and you still have people not enforcing strong passwords, for example. That's a huge deal. You still see people using those general use passwords, someone writing password, adding a capital P, switching O's with zeros. Guys, don't do that. That's super easy to pass through. The next thing is that we're saying is outdated dependencies, especially if you're using WordPress, WooCommerce, Shopify. You need to keep your dependencies up to date. Those updates are necessary. Those are not just aesthetics. Most of those updates contain security patches, so they are essential to keeping your website or your platform running securely. Another thing is unvalidated inputs. You'd see a lot of forms that doesn't have any validations, like even though those are well-known issues, like for example SQL injection, where you'd allow a malicious party, a hacker, to write in SQL code in an input and then pushing it to your server. You definitely should be validating your inputs. You definitely should be validating the data that is being passed to your backend before it's passed. Another thing that I think somewhat common nowadays is improper access controls. So you'd see users gaining access to admin areas or to areas that they shouldn't be accessing or seeing. So you need to effectively manage your access rights, the roles in your organization and on your website. And finally, which is I think going to be shocking, we still have websites that doesn't have HTTPS, doesn't have SSL certificates. They're still using HTTP. Please, if you have a website, if you're doing even the basic thing of just having a landing page, informing your clients about your business, you need to implement an SSL certificate. It's free. It's easy to implement. Please do it.
I think that's really helpful. Thinking about the password thing, I saw a suggestion the other day where the first password is just always rejected because as a user, I know that I type my password in wrong all the time. So if I typed it in, it said no, I just try it again. But it would help with brute force attacks because the brute force stacker would be trying the first password and then moving on to the second. Anyway, cool ideas out there to kind of get around that. But Getting back to the topic at hand, are there any signs that a site might already be vulnerable?
Well, I mean, it could, but you need to understand that usually if your site is vulnerable, it's going to be a silent attack. Like most hackers, they just don't try not to expose themselves at the beginnings. For example, if your site is not using HTTPS, if you don't have an SSL certificate, then you're mostly vulnerable. If you haven't updated your, CMS or plugins in months, then you are definitely vulnerable because those security flaws are all over the internet, and even a rookie hacker can utilize one of those if you don't patch your website. A third thing I think is if you start seeing weird URLs in your web analytics, like if you're using, for example, Google Analytics, and you start seeing really weird URLs that are logged, then someone is spoofing your website, someone is utilizing your website for malicious attacks. And if suddenly you see a spike in failed login attempts, just like you're trying to do right now, then someone is trying to brute force their way into your system. So you need to be careful that your website is vulnerable.
So keeping an eye on the security is quite important. I definitely know that a lot of people are just, set and forget it with their websites, but keeping active is important there, is what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. You definitely need to be on top of your website when it comes to security.
Okay. And so you said a lot of the attacks and stuff are silent, but what does a real attack look like?
There are different shapes, and I don't want to get too much into technicalities, but I think the most common steps for attacking a website, it all starts with scanning. So malicious attackers, they have bots that scans thousands of websites for known vulnerabilities. As I mentioned, if you're using, let's say, a translation plugin and you haven't updated it in months, so those bots scan thousands of websites really quick, trying to find those plugins and see the version of it. If your website has this translation plugin and it's outdated, then you have that vulnerability. But then the malicious attacker, they get notified that, okay, this website is lacking an update, or for example, they have, a form that is not properly validated. Then they find your website and they start injecting malicious code into it. Say a fake login page. If they can, they would directly inject SQL code into one of your forms, and they can execute code remotely, especially if you have a plugin that's not being updated. Now, once they are in, they start collecting credentials in the background while everything seems normal. So they don't start, usually hackers or malicious attackers, they don't start by, let's say, hurting your data. They start by collecting the data that you have. So they gain more access and more access by time. They can take a couple of actions. For example, they can destroy all your data and then ask you for some money for it. If they're just playing around for the sake of destroying people's businesses, they would just delete everything, delete all your backups, and you're out of the business, and so forth. And another approach would be targeting people. So they don't target the website itself, they target the people who's running it. So one of your admins gets a phishing email, they click a couple of buttons, they are being redirected to a fake login page, they enter their credentials, and voila, their credentials are out there with the hackers. Once the attacker gains access again to your backend, to your platforms, they can encrypt your backend, they can encrypt your data, they can demand payments to restore it. And this is what we call a ransomware. Like, in one of the cases, I worked with a startup that just delayed updating their CMS. One of those bots exploited an old plugin on it. They injected malicious scripts, started redirecting users to a phishing site. So look how much image damage that they got, those startups. And they only noticed that after Google blacklisted them. So they haven't noticed that for weeks. They found out about that when Google blacklisted their domain because it was marked as a phishing domain. So the damage that has been done is actually so hard to recover from. Like, it's not easy to gain Google's bots' trust again. It was just because of an outdated plugin.
That sounds brutal. I can just picture that from, if it was the real world, somebody could just drive around and basically like scan door codes for, to find weak doors and that sort of thing. And they're just able to do that automatically and from an automated system online and then exploit it from there. The idea that you only find out when you get blacklisted, that your business is pretty much destroyed at that point, and that's tough.
Exactly.
Okay, so kind of moving on to a more positive note, or proactive note. So what are some of the security habits or design choices that every site should just have from day one?
Yeah, I think, again, I'll start with the easiest ones. Implement SSL certificate. on your website. Not just on your main website, on your admin panel, on your managements, on your CRM back office. Implement SSL certificates. You should always go with HTTPS. This is the bare minimum for security. The second thing, try to utilize two-factor authentication, or in some countries they call multi-factor authentication, so 2FA or MFA for your admins, for your user accounts. So the better that you protect those passwords, even if someone, for example, leaked their password by mistake through a phishing site, at least they would have a second factor authentication check. They would receive a message, they would have to enter a code, they would have to click on a secure link sent to their email address. Do it. And the third thing is you need to follow the principle of least privilege. If you're granting access to users, especially your employees or your internal staff, you don't have to give a user more access than they needed. Okay. If you're an author, you're responsible for writing articles and publishing them, then you shouldn't be able to access, let's say, site management. You shouldn't be able to access product management. Because if in some case you got hacked and the hackers were able to gain access to your two-factor authentication, they would be blocked by the access that you have. So they only have access to sabotage your, let's say, articles, but they won't be able to access your products, your system management. The fourth thing would be to regularly dependency check. If you're using third-party plugins, if you're using third-party tools, you need to keep them up to date at all time, at all costs. The second thing is to check your input validations. As I've said, that's a really old way of hacking. It's one of the simplest, and anyone can do it pretty much. You don't need to be a power user. You can just, if a form doesn't have validation, you can just execute SQL injection code on it. That's super easy to implement. And I'm not encouraging people to doing that, don't get me wrong, but I mean, you should be aware of it as a business owner and be protected against it. So you need to secure your input validations. And last but not least, you need to have backups. I think this is one of the most resented to B or C plans when it comes to security. Let's say all of your security measures failed, hackers were able to gain access and remove all of your data or encrypt it. You can just change all of your access code and then restart your business from the last backup. So the better you have a backup plan, like let's say instead of having weekly backups, you would have daily or even a backup per hour, the more you are protected against malicious attacks.
Thank you. I mean, that's pretty comprehensive and sort of technical. Are there any simple changes that non-technical teams can implement to improve security?
Yes, that's also, again, that protects against social attacks. So first of all, you can use password managers to save all of your passwords. You definitely need to enforce strong passwords. So when it comes to creating passwords, you shouldn't let your staff just create those 5-number passwords, like from 1 to 5, QWERTY. You need to enforce some strong password policy, capital letters, small letters, special characters. You need to have that mixture in your password. That would make it super hard to being discovered using brute force attacks. Make sure that your site has a valid SSL certificate, the green padlock that you see on a browser when you open a website. So this is also non-technical. Like in most cases, especially if you're using a well-known hosting service, you can install an SSL certificate without the need of a tech person. You can just add it to your website with a couple of clicks on your hosting company. The third thing would be don't reuse your passwords or credentials throughout different systems. I see that a lot. One manager that have 2 or 3 companies, they use the same passwords for all the services and all the accounts that they have. That's wrong. There are a lot of ways that you can learn how to create combinations of the same password base for different services. And that's one of the approaches that we teach our clients. So you have your main password, let's call it the base password, and then you would add a combination of letters and numbers that represent the service that you're working with. Okay, this makes it super hard for hackers to be able to gain access to different services if for some reason one of your passwords have been leaked. And finally, if you're running your platform or building your website on top of a platform, again, Shopify, WordPress, Coordinator, WooCommerce, you need to select the platform that releases more on security batches, who has a dedicated team that really covers all the issues that they would have along the way.
That's super helpful. I know that there's been some updates and solutions from the past. I remember working multiple corporate jobs earlier in my career, and they were always like, oh, you need to change your password every 90 days or every 30 days or something like that. And it was always super frustrating because I was trying to make a complex, difficult password, but I couldn't remember it if I had to change it every 30 days. And so inevitably, it just leads people to picking easily to remember passwords or just adding a 1 to the end of the last password or something like that. I know that now, with the current system that we have, I'm able, I log on, it just does a face ID recognition for me, and then we use a password manager. So, I just, whenever I need to make a password, I have to suggest a strong password is kept in the password manager. I don't even have to know what it is. I can just go to the password manager and auto fills it for me. So
You see,
that's
like,
awesome.
like we have solutions for those nowadays. And you can, thinking of the risks of leaking your password and people gaining access to your account and your data is, it's worth taking this hard path towards having a password manager, locking it with your biometrics, like using your Face ID and stuff. So, yeah, good for you, Tucker. I see that you're following on the strongest path of security.
I'm going to shave my beard off one of these days, and we'll see if it still recognizes me, or I'm going to have to find out what my original password
We'll
was.
see. We'll see.
Okay, so where do you see businesses underestimating the risks most?
I think it also falls down to we're too small to be targeted. Okay, a lot of business owners, like we have this small shop that we're selling souvenirs, and we have an e-commerce website we're so small. Why would someone think of attacking us? So that's dangerous, because when attackers do attack, they don't go over the web and search for your specific store. Those attacks are automated. So, as I've said previously, it's bots that search for vulnerabilities. It doesn't matter if you're the biggest company in your field or just a small retail store that sells souvenirs. You can still be attacked, okay? Because, again, those bots, they don't care who you are. They just care about, are you vulnerable or not?
Okay, so adding to that, though, is there a false sense of security that comes along with using well-known platforms?
Yeah, I think that's also another subject when it comes to mainly most small businesses. Just because we're using WordPress or Magento, then we should be safe. But I think it's the exact opposite of that. We talked about this, if you remember, in the episode of Build It or Use a well-known platform to achieve your business goal. Using those well-known platforms actually makes you more vulnerable to attacks, because you have a set of people that are looking for vulnerabilities in those platforms. And once they discover one of those, since you have thousands of websites utilizing those WordPress websites, it's easier for hackers to focus on those rather than focus on websites that are custom built.
Okay, so one exploit may give them access to thousands or tens of thousands of sites versus having to break everything individually.
Exactly.
Yeah. So getting back to more practical tools and stuff. So are there tools that you can recommend for monitoring or improving security?
You have a lot of tools nowadays in the market that does this. I think the most used ones are, for example, Cloudflare. A lot of the websites right now, they're utilizing Cloudflare. DNS services, for example, Cloudflare protects you out of the box with their free plan against DDoS attacks. They have a firewall. At least you can sleep at night resting assured that your website won't be denied service by those kind of attacks. You have plugins to monitor your systems. For example, if you're using WordPress, you have a plugin called WordFence that monitors the activities of people. That's a good thing. You have another plugin, I think it was called Sucuri or something similar to that. And you can, for example, have tools scanning your websites for vulnerabilities. You have OWA SP Zap. So this is a service that you can also log in there with. I think even their free plan is good. You can enter your website, it will scan it for known vulnerability, and then you take those recommendations that it gives you if there's something vulnerable and go back to your development team, ask them to fix it and cover it. You have systems that could all keep scanning your website, so you would subscribe to those services and they would keep scanning your website for dependencies, any vulnerabilities, like there's Dependabot. They're really doing a good job with that. And finally, again, going back to the most welcome and shockingly the easiest to fix issue, which is SSL certificates. You don't have to pay for an SSL certificate. Just go to let'sencrypt.com. They offer free SSL certificates for any website, for no matter how many websites that you have, you can still implement those SSL certificates. And again, even if you're using a well-known hosting service, they all have integrations with Let's Encrypt SSL certificates. You can just select it. The service would install it automatically without any technical expertise on your website or websites if you have more than one.
Okay, those sounds like great tools. So we talk about being active, but should teams be doing manual audits, or are there automated ways to stay protected?
So in addition to the automated ways, you definitely need to do some manual audits. I've talked about some of those automated tools that would really help you with continuous protection, but you definitely need to have a policy of auditing. Like, I don't know, in some companies, if you're a big company, that should be at least on a quarterly basis. So each quarter you would sit down, you would audit your processes, you would audit your systems. And especially if you're having big changes, like if you release a new feature, if you started using a new system, you definitely need to have a security audit. Okay, because again, automations, all the solutions that I've talked about, they find the known issues, okay? But humans, they find the unknown ones, okay? So if you need to be protected against the known issues, automation is your path. But especially if you're a big fish in the market, you need to have a human team that sit down and audit your systems.
That's very helpful. I guess I think it's story time. So do you have a story, either a success or maybe a disaster, that shows what happens when security is taken seriously or ignored altogether?
So we have quite a couple of stories in that, but yeah, I think one of the good ones is one of our clients, they hired us after they found out that their entire product catalog was deleted by one of their admins. Okay, so someone gained access to their admin panel and they just deleted all their product catalog, removed everything. Of course, we have a security team on board, so they took over, they started auditing, looking through the ins and outs, the plugins that are used in the systems. It turned out that one of their developers reused the same password for their dev environment and their production environments. And the password was admin.
Great password.
Okay, so since he was a developer, he was able to set his password without the password policy. And then he used the same password for both the dev environment and the production environment. So, of course, that was the main entry point for the hacker, the malicious attacker. But then we figured out that there are some other stuff that needs to be changed. So, first of all, we rebuilt their admin platform with three main changes. The first one was role-based access. So we separated their users between regular users, admins. Each user had access to specific parts of the platform. We implemented two-factor authentication for admins. So even if your password is admin123, the hacker would need a second code that's sent directly to your phone number over an SMS to be able to gain access to the platform. And third thing was real-time backups, because they didn't have real-time backups. And I think the closest backup that they had was almost 2 weeks old. So we have recovered that backup, but they had to rebuild all the missing parts of it. And, you don't keep track of the changes of your product, especially if we're talking about a full product catalog. I mean, since then, thankfully, they haven't had any single issue since we implemented those three changes. Their confidence with investors really went up after showing that they have done some security audits and changes. So this one is funny, short, but I mean, you can see how stupid, if I may say, that error was.
Yeah, it's definitely an eye-opening story, that one. That's kind of scary. Looks like we are running a little bit low on time. So if there's someone listening today that hasn't thought about security in months or ever, what's the one thing that they should be doing right now?
Two main things. First of all, update everything. Your CMS, your plugins, your libraries, everything that you're using. If you can't do that manually, like if you don't have a control panel to doing that, please contact your software provider and ask them to do that. Second, you definitely need to enable two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication on all the services that you use. Your hosting, your CMS, again, your email accounts, you need to implement that everywhere. those two steps, those simple two steps, they would block the majority of automated attacks that might hit you.
Okay, and where can people reach you if they want help making their systems more secure?
Well, I'll always be happy to help. Just you can reach out to me or to Tucker as well on LinkedIn, or you can visit our company's website, so pentacreative.co.uk/contact. So just drop us a message, and yeah, we can also offer you auditing services. So if you have built your website with another company, we can do some sanity checks on your security and give you a report on that.
Okay, well, that's fantastic. Munir, thank you very much for your time today. And to the viewer, if this episode helped you, please subscribe or send it to a friend that could use a site security review. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you again next time on Creative Ops.